So here he is, our glorious Jojo's Bizarre Adventure President, Funny Valentine. I've always been a fan of collecting different statues and figurines, especially of Dragon Ball Z and other such shows tend to be more my favorites. It's a lot of fun, and it's definitely something new, trying to create your own rather than dumping tons of money into pre-existing ones, as they tend to be usually pretty expensive. Or I end up putting the money into it anyway. But when I am finished with a project, I like to take a few moments to take everything about it into account and see what I can do and what I can take with me if I try to do a project like this again, or to move on to other projects similar to it. So, starting on the positives, making this out of clay was very fun choice. Working with clay is something that I get a lot of enjoyment out of, and it's always interesting to see what you can do. You can really put together anything you want as long as it pretty much doesn't defy gravity, which sometimes can be hard to do. But I guess a lot of my favorite parts about it are a lot of the details, and especially like the wrinkles in it, like these parts here in the shirt. I'm really satisfied with how those came out, and especially the sort of frilly collar he has here. I'm a huge fan of how that came out in the finished product. The full figure itself and its proportions were pretty well in the end. He definitely looks like President Valentine as intended. Although there's a lot of things I've really liked about this, there's a lot that could be improved. If I were to do this again and fix stuff, a lot of it would be really smoothing it out and working on, like, there's cracks all over it. There's big crack right here. His whole leg is cracking off. I had to glue so many little parts of his back cape here cracking off. Yeah, in the oven, his whole arm fell off. It's a total train wreck, really. Both of his feet, these little things around his legs are complete nightmare. Especially in the oven. That has to be the worst part about working with this kind of clay, is if you're going to make something huge like this, oven baking is just awful. You have to make sure it's supported right. It fell over more than halfway through the baking time, and I had to scramble you're just sitting there one moment, and a couple seconds pass, you just hear this thunk, and you're like, oh crap. You have to open the oven up, set him back up, burn yourself like 3 times in the process while trying to save your creation. That result, the oven baking is where a lot of these problems come in. His legs are at kind of, you see how it kind of bends outward, and his foot gets kind of smushed in here. And I think a lot of that is because of while sculpting him too, like I had him on his feet, and that kept pushing all this weight down on these flimsier parts that didn't hold up too well. So it ended up in them getting a little bit, it's not incredibly noticeable, but it's noticeable to me. He doesn't stand on his own either. He did at some point. I might be lucky enough, but probably not. He's just gonna totally crumble if he falls over, which there's already been a lot of pieces broke off of him. These little lines around his legs, they've all broken off at least like once each. His hair, it's got a bunch of little cracks in it. This thing fell off. There's little white bits of dust all over my desk from all that, and he just keeps crumbling and falling. His belt buckle's shifted up in an awkward spot, and from further away he looks totally fine, but I don't know, it might just be because I'm so particular about all the stuff that I make. But I think honestly there's a lot to work with on this one, and I'm not even sure if I'll move on to giving him a coat of paint. But oh yeah, look, just now this thing fell off of him. But it's a total train wreck, at least to me. But yeah, some of the pieces even are unfinished. He doesn't have any of the little line markings in his arms. He has them kind of like what he has on the legs, but on the arms, I didn't really even put anything into this. These little cuffs on his sleeves, they're supposed to be more kind of wrinkly and frilly, more like his neck piece, but I kind of just made them flat. It was a little bit rushed towards the end because I was trying to just get him into a place where he needed to be finished, and so he didn't fall apart before going in the oven. And yeah, a lot of this stuff, like look under here where this piece here broke off. You can see it back here. It's not all squished in. It's not fully finished up in the sculpting, and I think that's also what leads to a lot of the pieces being really overly fragile and falling off, is that they just weren't really finished. And that's also partly what happens when you work on a piece for like 5 hours straight. Usually it's better to take a break, and also helps if you don't do it up until like 2:30 a.m. But yeah, that all leads into what I've taken away from this. Big figurines need a lot of support, and I tried to go about that by inside a lot of his limbs and any part where there's a big connection between larger pieces. I have parts of paper clips that I cut up and kind of stuck through him to, you can't really see it in that crack at all, or really anywhere, which is the point. But that's meant to really give him more stability, and I think it works a little bit. Like, this leg is not completely fallen off, I think, because of the paper clips in it, and that helps to straighten out different parts. I stuck a paper clip all the way up each of his legs, and they went like all the way up into his upper body, and that definitely kept him more stable, but not really stable enough. One thing I think I might do with this is I think I might try to build him, or whatever larger figurine I might try next, in smaller pieces. I build my own miniatures from time to time, and one of these I have here, this miniature I made of Broly, I made him by doing individual parts. Some of them were blended together, like most of his upper body, I connected, his arms are connected with paper clips, and sort of a lot of it is building in pieces can be hard when you're working in bigger things like this, because it's more noticeable here. Like if his leg were a totally separate piece here, you'd be able to see kind of the crease where it would be its own separate thing, and it doesn't blend as well as I would like to if I make a larger statue. But here with Broly, a lot of it is like he has these big golden boots and stuff that really, it because it's a separate piece, it really works perfectly with going into his pants like that, and you really can't tell that he wasn't sculpted all as one thing. So I think being more choosy about how I split this project up into different pieces would be better, because all of this is one piece except for the cuffs on his cuffs on his sleeves, his hands, his lip here was actually a different piece, and these little knee pads. Everything else was just one big old piece in itself, and I think that really hurt it in the oven baking phase. And so much of the problems with this came from the oven baking. I baked it several different times because Gravity, his arm was coming off because it was the clay is really squishy and it doesn't like to stay upright like this. I had parts of it that weren't thoroughly baked enough, so I had to put him in for more time, and I put him in on his back because I didn't want him to fall over again, and that really messed up around his hair and the back of his head. Not that that's the part that's going to be seen very much, but it was definitely affected in the end. Overall, I think this project was a pretty decent success. Even though it didn't turn out exactly as I had imagined, which is completely fine, and that's something that you really should expect anytime you're working with anything art related, especially for trying out new projects. I've taken note of what improvements I need to make, and I think it ended up alright. I'm excited to continue working with clay and sculpting, and I would really encourage and recommend you give it a try if you might be interested. I used a clay called Sculpt to build these, and I used it to make Valentine as well as most of my other sculptures, including Broly, who I showed in this video. You can find it pretty easily on Amazon or through most craft stores. I think it goes for around like $10 a pound, maybe a little less, but a pound is a pretty big amount of this stuff. Valentine took less than a pound to make, and he's probably the biggest thing I've ever built. I went with the biggest bang for my buck, and I bought an 8.5 pound box of it for like $35. And it's a ton of clay, but it's great if you want to get a lot of practice with it. You don't have to worry about using up too much of it if a project of yours flops, because you'll have a ton left over. And on top of that, it never dries out, so there's no need to worry about using it all quickly. If you have any recommendations for sculpting tips or something that you'd like to see, or any questions or comments at all, I'd love to hear them.